Ethan Blake had it all: wealth, success, and the prestige of being one of Manhattan's most influential tech CEOs. But behind the facade of his perfect life lay a devastating truth: the family he had abandoned years ago. When a chance encounter at a charity gala reveals the existence of 4 children he never knew he had, Ethan's carefully constructed world begins to crumble. As he faces the guilt of his past and the challenges of reconnecting with his children, he must navigate media scandals, mistrust, and his own insecurities to prove he's worthy of a second chance. Will Ethan be able to rebuild the bonds he once broke, or will the ghosts of his mistakes haunt him forever? Stay with us as this gripping story unfolds, filled with emotional turns and inspiring moments of resilience. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Before we go any further, tell us, where are you watching from? We're curious to hear from you. Ethan Blake adjusted his tie as he gazed out the window of his sleek Manhattan penthouse. The city buzzed below, a constant hum of ambition and chaos. At 38, Ethan was the CEO of one of the most innovative tech firms in the world, a self-made billionaire with every luxury at his fingertips. But tonight, a charity gala loomed a stage where he could flaunt his success. Yet, his mind wandered to an old memory: Emily, his ex-wife, smiling in their tiny college apartment. She had always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. Their love had built the foundation of his empire. But love had turned into routine, and routine had suffocated him. 5 years ago, he had walked away, leaving her and their struggling marriage behind for someone younger, livelier: Madison, the woman who promised excitement. Ethan checked his phone. A reminder for tonight's event popped up. Madison wasn't attending. Their relationship had been strained for months, her once vibrant energy now feeling like a weight. Still, she remained useful for appearances, and appearances were everything in his world. At the gala, Ethan moved through the crowd, shaking hands and charming donors. The centerpiece of the night was a children's choir, a heartwarming touch to loosen wallets. As the children filed onto the stage, laughter bubbled from the audience. Ethan froze, for children stood front and center, identical in appearance, their dark eyes and sharp cheekbones a mirror of his own. The performance began, but Ethan couldn't focus. The resemblance was too striking. The boy leading the group had the same determined look Ethan had seen in the mirror countless times. The little girl next to him tilted her head in concentration, a mannerism Ethan recognized as his own from childhood. The applause startled him back to reality. The children scanned the crowd, and their eyes landed on a woman in the audience: Emily. Ethan felt his breath hitch. He hadn't seen her since the divorce. She was more radiant than he remembered, her confidence commanding. As she waved at the children, they grinned and shouted, "Mom!" The room seemed to tilt. Ethan couldn't breathe. "Mom?" Emily's gaze met his, cool and composed. She turned back to her conversation, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Ethan, however, couldn't unsee the truth. These children were his. How could she have kept this from him? His mind raced, each thought heavier than the last. Had she done this out of spite, or was there more to the story? The night ended, but Ethan couldn't leave. He lingered in the shadows, watching as Emily gathered the children, their energy lighting up the dim hallway. As they disappeared into the night, Ethan's phone buzzed. Madison's name flashed on the screen, but he ignored it. He had to know the truth. The following morning, Ethan couldn't shake the image of the children from his mind. Their faces, so unmistakably his, haunted him with every sip of coffee and glance at his reflection. The memories he had buried of laughter, love, and promises made long ago rose to the surface, sharper and heavier than he could handle. Sitting in his penthouse office, the morning sunlight streaming through the glass walls, Ethan scrolled through his phone. He hesitated before typing Emily's name into the search bar. His palms felt clammy as he hit enter. Her name appeared in numerous articles, none scandalous but all reputable. Dr. Emily Carter, pioneer in pediatric care. She had built a thriving career as a respected pediatrician, specializing in rare disorders affecting children. There were no mentions of her personal life, no photos of the children outside of her clinic's website. Her professional demeanor hid everything that might have hinted at the truth. "Sir, your 10 o'clock is here," his assistant announced, snapping him back to the present. "Reschedule it," Ethan replied curtly, grabbing his jacket and heading for the elevator. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The hospital lobby buzzed with life as Ethan entered. He scanned the directory, finding Emily's name listed as the head of pediatrics. Memories of walking hand in hand with her through medical school galas came rushing back. Back then, they had been a team, unstoppable in their shared ambition. When he reached her office, the door was ajar. Inside, Emily stood by her desk, speaking to a nurse about a patient's chart. Her hair was tied back neatly, her posture calm and confident. "Emily," Ethan said, his voice breaking the room's quiet rhythm. She looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to resolve. "Ethan," the nurse glanced between them before excusing herself, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. "What are you doing here?" Emily asked, crossing her arms. Ethan stepped into the office and closed the door. "I saw them," he said, his tone low. "At the gala. The children. They're mine, aren't they?" Emily sighed, a mixture of frustration and fatigue flickering in her eyes. "You don't get to just show up and ask that after 5 years," she replied. "You kept them from me," Ethan shot back, his voice rising. "You didn't even give me a chance." "You didn't want a chance," Emily snapped. "You walked away, Ethan. You left because you wanted a different life. You served me divorce papers on our anniversary." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but he couldn't. The truth hung heavy in the room. Emily softened, her voice quieter now. "When I found out I was pregnant, you were already gone. And I wasn't going to bring them into your world of charity galas and Madison spotlight. They deserve better than being part of your image." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, the weight of her words pressing down. "I didn't know," he muttered. "I didn't know, Emily." "If I had, you would have stayed," she interrupted. "Out of guilt? Out of obligation? That's not what they need, Ethan." A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse peeked in. "Dr. Carter, your 10 o'clock is here." Emily nodded before turning back to Ethan. "I have work to do. If you want to be part of their lives, it's not going to be easy. And it's not about you anymore, it's about them." As Ethan left the office, her words echoed in his mind. "It's not about you anymore." For the first time in years, he questioned whether he could live up to what those words demanded. Ethan left the hospital with a storm brewing in his mind. Emily's words stung, but they were true. He had walked away, blind to the life he was leaving behind. Now, the faces of those 4 children, his children, were etched into his thoughts. He returned to his office, but couldn't focus. His assistant brought in documents, reminders of meetings, and updates from the board. All of it felt trivial. For years, his empire had been his pride, the symbol of his success. Now, it seemed hollow compared to the family he had unknowingly abandoned. After hours of pacing and failed attempts at work, Ethan decided he needed to prove to Emily and to himself that he was serious. He needed to see his children not as an absent father, but as someone willing to earn their trust. The next morning, Ethan stood outside Emily's modest suburban home. It was a far cry from the luxury penthouse they had once shared, but it radiated warmth and life. Toys littered the front yard, and a chalk drawing of a rainbow adorned the driveway. He hesitated before knocking. When the door opened, Emily stood there, her expression unreadable. "You came back," she said, not hiding her surprise. "I want to meet them," Ethan said. His voice was steady, but his heart raced. Emily studied him for a long moment before stepping aside. "They're in the backyard," she said. "But, Ethan, don't make promises you can't keep." He nodded, swallowing hard. The sound of laughter greeted him as he stepped onto the patio. For children were huddled around a makeshift fort, their faces glowing with joy. The boy with Ethan's determined eyes was giving instructions, his siblings hanging onto every word. "Alex," Emily called, her voice gentle. "Come here for a moment." The boy looked up, his expression curious. He ran over, his siblings following. "This is Ethan," Emily said. "He's someone I'd like you to meet." Ethan crouched to their level, his throat tightening. "Hi," he managed, his voice softer than he expected. The children regarded him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Alex was the first to speak. "Do you work with Mom?" he asked. Ethan hesitated, glancing at Emily. She gave a slight nod, her eyes urging him to proceed carefully. "Not exactly," Ethan said. "But I'd like to get to know you. All of you." Ben, the quiet one with a curious gaze, tilted his head. "Do you like robots?" "I'm building one for school." Ethan smiled, relief washing over him. "I love robots. Maybe you can show me how it works." Ben's face lit up, and soon all four were talking at once. Alex described his fort-building plans. Diana showed him a drawing she'd made, and Charlie asked if he liked cookies because Mom makes the best ones. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a connection he couldn't explain. He listened to every word, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and guilt. Emily watched from the doorway, arms crossed. When Ethan finally looked at her, her expression was guarded but less cold. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan found himself laughing, playing, and forgetting the weight of his world. When it was time to leave, Diana ran up and hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "Come back soon, okay?" she whispered. Ethan nodded, his voice catching. "I will." But as he drove away, doubts crept in. Could he truly make up for 5 years of absence? And if he failed, would he lose them forever? Ethan spent the next week planning his next steps, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. His encounter with the children had been overwhelming, and their warmth left him both hopeful and terrified. What if he let them down? On Friday, Emily called. "They're asking about you," she said, her voice neutral. "Alex wants to know if you'll help with his science project. Are you free this weekend?" "Yes," Ethan replied quickly, though his weekend was packed with meetings and a corporate gala. None of that mattered now. Saturday morning, Ethan arrived at Emily's house, carrying a small toolkit he hadn't touched in years. He had bought it the night before, unsure if his involvement in Alex's project would require actual tools or just encouragement. The front door opened, and Alex greeted him with a determined look. "I'm building a wind turbine for the science fair," he announced, leading Ethan into the living room where a cluttered table awaited. Diana and Ben sat nearby, watching curiously, while Charlie worked on assembling a puzzle on the floor. "Where do we start?" Ethan asked, sitting down beside Alex. The boy's face lit up as he launched into an explanation of the materials he had gathered. Ethan listened intently, occasionally offering suggestions but letting Alex take the lead. The hours passed in a flurry of diagrams, measurements, and laughter as Ben and Diana joined in, offering their own ideas. Emily observed from the kitchen, her hands busy with dishes, but her eyes fixed on the scene. Ethan looked out of place with his neatly pressed shirt rolled up to his elbows, surrounded by scattered wires and paper. Yet there was something genuine about his presence. Later, as the children played in the backyard, Ethan found himself sitting at the kitchen table with Emily. "They're amazing," he said quietly. "They are," she replied, her tone softening. He hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "I don't want to disrupt their lives, Emily. I know I can't erase the past, but I want to be here for them if you'll let me." Emily looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You'll need to earn their trust. And mine. Words won't be enough this time." Ethan nodded. "I understand." That evening, as Ethan prepared to leave, Alex handed him a small, lopsided drawing of a wind turbine with the words, "Thank you," scribbled across the top. "Can you come?" to the science fair next week?" Alex asked. Ethan knelt to meet his son's eyes. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." As he walked to his car, a wave of emotion swept over him. He had promised to show up, but the weight of that promise felt heavier than he anticipated. The next morning, a call from his office shattered the calm. His head of PR, Lauren, spoke urgently. "Ethan, a reporter is asking questions about your ex-wife and kids." They've connected the dots. His stomach dropped. He knew what this meant. The media frenzy he had feared was about to erupt, threatening the fragile bond he had just begun to build. Ethan paced his penthouse, phone in hand, as Lauren's voice echoed through the line. "They're running the story tomorrow," she explained. "An exclusive. They've got photos of you leaving Emily's house. Speculation about the kids is all over social media. We need a statement, Ethan. Fast." Ethan's chest tightened. He had dreaded this moment, but it was inevitable. The media would twist the truth, turning his children into headlines and Emily into a target. "Draft something," he said, his tone clipped. "Make it clear this is a private matter, and I won't tolerate my kids being dragged into it." "I can do that," Lauren replied. "But Ethan, we need more than damage control. If you want to protect them, you'll have to address this head-on." Later that day, Ethan drove back to Emily's house. He wasn't sure how to explain the impending storm, but she had to hear it from him first. Emily opened the door, a faint frown on her face. "Ethan, can we talk?" he asked, his voice heavy. She stepped aside, letting him in. The children's laughter echoed from the backyard. For a moment he hesitated. Their innocence felt like a fragile bubble he was about to burst. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, crossing her arms. "The media knows," Ethan admitted. "About us. About the kids. They're running a story tomorrow." Emily's face hardened. "How?" Ethan shook his head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is protecting them. I've already told my team to push back on anything invasive, but it's going to be messy." Emily's eyes flashed with anger. "This is exactly why I didn't tell you, Ethan. I wanted to shield them from this your world, your chaos." "I know," Ethan said, his voice firm, "and I'll do whatever it takes to protect them. But I need your help, Emily. We need to face this together." That evening, as the children played, Ethan and Emily sat at the kitchen table, hashing out a plan. "We'll issue a statement," Ethan said. "Something simple. No details about the kids. Just enough to stop the speculation." "And what happens after that?" Emily asked, her voice cold. "When they follow us to school? To the grocery store? What then?" "I'll handle it," Ethan promised. "I'll put security in place, whatever you need. This is on me, Emily. I won't let them turn your life into a circus." Emily looked at him, doubt lingering in her eyes. "This isn't just about you, Ethan. It's about them. If you break this trust, there's no coming back." "I won't," Ethan said, his tone resolute. The next morning, the article broke. Headlines screamed about Ethan Blake's secret family, with blurred photos of Emily and the children. Speculation ran wild, but Ethan's statement was ready. "This is a private matter involving my family. I ask for respect and privacy as we navigate this situation." The story dominated the news cycle, but Ethan's PR team worked tirelessly to limit the damage. Security was stationed discreetly near Emily's home and the children's school. By evening, Ethan arrived at Emily's doorstep again. She opened the door, her expression weary but less hostile. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For trying," Emily replied. "This is a mess, but at least you're not running from it." Ethan nodded, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He wasn't running. Not this time. The days after the article's release were a whirlwind. Paparazzi staked out Emily's house and the children's school, cameras ready to capture the smallest detail. The kids, unaware of the growing storm, continued their routines, but Emily was on edge. Ethan visited frequently, helping wherever he could. He coordinated security, handled Emily's mounting frustration, and ensured the children felt safe. But the pressure of juggling his public and private lives began to weigh on him. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Ethan and Emily sat in the living room, exhaustion etched into their faces. "I didn't think it would get this bad," Emily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't the life I wanted for them." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "It's not what I wanted either, but I'm doing everything I can to fix it." Emily sighed. "It's not just about fixing it, Ethan. It's about proving to them and to me that you're here for the right reasons, not out of guilt or obligation." Her words stung, but Ethan nodded. "I get it, and I'm not going anywhere." The next day, Ethan met with his PR team. "We've controlled the immediate fallout," Lauren reported. "But there's no guarantee the attention will die down anytime soon. The story has traction." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we redirected. I don't want them following Emily or the kids anymore." "Spin it, deflect, do whatever you need to." Lauren hesitated. "There's one angle we could use, but it's risky." "What is it?" Ethan asked. "An interview," she said. "On your terms. Frame it as a redemption story, acknowledge the mistakes you made, talk about reconnecting with your family. It could humanize you and take the heat off them." Ethan frowned. The thought of exposing his personal life further made his stomach turn. But if it protected Emily and the kids, it might be worth it. "Set it up," he said reluctantly. A week later, Ethan sat under the bright lights of a studio, his heart pounding. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist, smiled warmly, but Ethan knew every word would be scrutinized. "Ethan," the interviewer began, "you've been in the headlines recently for something very personal. What made you decide to come forward?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Honestly, I didn't plan for any of this to happen. But when it did, I realized I had to take responsibility not just for the mistakes I made in the past, but for the future I want to build with my children." The questions continued, probing but respectful. Ethan spoke carefully, balancing honesty with privacy. He shared moments of regret, the joy of reconnecting with his children, and his determination to protect them from the spotlight. Back home, Emily watched the interview with a mixture of emotions. She appreciated Ethan's effort, but couldn't ignore the skepticism gnawing at her. Could he really handle the scrutiny and still be the father her children needed? As the interview ended, Alex walked into the room. "Mom," he asked, his brow furrowed, "why are people talking about us on TV?" Emily's heart sank. She hadn't planned on explaining everything so soon. "Well," she began, choosing her words carefully, "sometimes people are curious about things that don't concern them. But what matters is that your dad is trying to help." Alex seemed to consider this before nodding slowly. "Is he going to stay?" Emily hesitated. "I think he wants to." Later that night, Ethan received a text from Emily. "We need to talk." The words sent a jolt through him. He knew whatever conversation lay ahead would be pivotal not just for him and Emily, but for the fragile bond he was building with his children. Ethan arrived at Emily's house the next morning, his stomach churning with anticipation. Her text had been short, but its weight was unmistakable. Emily opened the door, her face serious but calm. She gestured for him to follow her to the kitchen, where the kids' backpacks sat ready for school. The air between them felt charged, as though they were standing on the edge of a steep cliff. "What's going on?" Ethan asked cautiously. Emily motioned for him to sit. She remained standing, arms crossed. "The kids are starting to ask questions," she said. "Alex saw the interview, and he's not the only one noticing things. They're trying to piece it all together, and I can't keep dodging them forever." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "What do you think we should do?" "They deserve the truth," Emily said firmly. "But it has to come from both of us, together. We need to explain everything in a way they'll understand, why you weren't here, why you're here now." Ethan nodded. "You're right. I just don't want to overwhelm them." "They're stronger than you think," Emily replied. "But if we don't handle this carefully, we risk breaking their trust." That evening after Dinner, Emily and Ethan sat the children down in the living room. Alex, Ben, Charlie, and Diana settled onto the couch, their expressions curious but calm. Mom, and I need to talk to you about something important, Ethan began, his voice steady but laced with nervousness. Emily picked up where he left off. We've always told you that your dad was a businessman, someone very busy with his work. But there's more to the story. The children exchanged glances, sensing the gravity of the moment. I wasn't here for a long time, Ethan admitted, his throat tight. And that was my fault. I made mistakes that hurt your mom, and I didn't realize how much I was leaving behind. But when I found out about all of you, I wanted to change that. I wanted to be part of your lives. Ben furrowed his brow. You didn't know about us? No, Ethan said softly. Not until recently. And when I found out, I realized how much I missed, how much I should have been here for. Diana's lip quivered. Were you scared of us? Ethan leaned forward, his voice thick with emotion. No, sweetheart. I wasn't scared of you. I was scared of being a bad dad, of not knowing how to be the kind of dad you deserve. But I want to try. I want to be here for you now. Alex spoke up, his voice measured. You left Mom alone. Ethan flinched, but nodded. I did. And I'll always regret that. But your mom has done an incredible job raising you, and I want to help her now if she'll let me. The room fell silent as the children absorbed his words. Finally, Charlie spoke, his voice small. Are you going to leave again? No, Ethan said firmly, his gaze unwavering. I'm here to stay. I promise. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Ethan and Emily sat together in the kitchen. That was harder than I thought, Ethan admitted. You did well, Emily said. But promises are just words until you prove them. You need to follow through, Ethan. I will, he vowed. For the first time, Emily's expression softened, and she nodded. Let's hope so for their sake. As Ethan left the house, the weight of his promise pressed heavily on his shoulders. He knew the path ahead would be long and uncertain, but he was determined to prove that he could be the father his children deserved. Ethan began visiting the house regularly. He helped with homework, joined in on backyard soccer games, and even attended Diana's art class showcase. Slowly, he started to carve out a place in his children's lives. But the weight of rebuilding trust was heavier than he anticipated. Every interaction with Emily was a careful balance of gratitude and guilt, her guarded demeanor a constant reminder of how much he had to prove. One afternoon, as Ethan helped Alex with a science project, Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting from calm to worry. What is it? Ethan asked. It's an email from their school, Emily replied. The media has been trying to contact staff. They're asking questions about the kids. Ethan's jaw tightened. I'll handle it. My team will shut it down. Emily shook her head. You can't control everything, Ethan. This is what I was afraid of. Later that night, Ethan called Lauren. I thought we were containing this, he said, frustration bubbling in his voice. We've done what we can, Lauren replied. But the school's not under our control. If the media's digging there, it'll take more than a PR statement to stop them. Ethan exhaled sharply. Find a way. I don't care how much it costs. Hanging up, he stared out the window of his penthouse. The city glittered below, a testament to his success, but all he felt was helplessness. No amount of wealth or influence could shield his children completely from the chaos his life had brought them. The next day, at Alex's science fair, the first crack in Ethan's resolve appeared. The gymnasium was crowded with students, parents, and teachers. Ethan stood by Alex's wind turbine display, listening proudly as his son explained its mechanics to a judge. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Ethan spotted a man with a camera, lurking near the entrance. His heart sank. The photographer wasn't part of the event. He was there for a story. Ethan acted quickly, positioning himself between the man and Alex. Leave, he said, his voice low and firm. The photographer smirked. "You can't stop the press, Mr. Blake. People want to know about your secret family." Ethan's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "This is a school event. You're not welcome here." A teacher noticed the commotion and stepped in, escorting the man out. But the damage was done. Alex had seen everything, his eyes wide with confusion. "Dad," Alex whispered, tugging on Ethan's sleeve. "Why was that man taking pictures?" Ethan crouched down, his voice steady but pained. "Sometimes people are curious about things they shouldn't be. But you don't need to worry about him. I won't let anyone bother you." Alex nodded, but the doubt in his eyes was unmistakable. That evening, back at Emily's house, the tension reached a breaking point. "You brought this into their lives," Emily said, her tone sharp. "Do you see now why I wanted to keep them away from your world? I'm trying to fix it." Ethan shot back. "I can't change the past, Emily, but I'm doing everything I can to protect them now." "And what happens when you can't?" she demanded. "When your world swallows them whole. They deserve better, Ethan." Her words struck the nerve. "I know they do," he snapped. "And I'm trying to be better for them, for you. But if you keep shutting me out, how am I supposed to prove that?" The room fell silent, the weight of their shared frustration hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice quieter but no less firm. "Prove it, Ethan. Not with words, with actions. Protect them, even if it means sacrificing what's easiest for you." Ethan nodded, her words sinking in. He couldn't afford to fail, not this time. The weeks that followed tested Ethan in ways he hadn't anticipated. The media frenzy continued despite his efforts to contain it. Every time he stepped out with the children, a camera lurked nearby. Alex and Ben became wary of strangers, and Diana began asking why people wanted pictures of their family. Ethan had hired security to keep reporters at bay, but the damage was seeping into their lives. Emily's frustrations grew, and the cracks between them deepened. One morning, Ethan received a call from Lauren. "We have a bigger problem," she said grimly. "The photographer at Alex's school sold the story to a tabloid. They're running it tomorrow with the kids' faces." Ethan's stomach churned. "I thought we locked this down." "We tried, Ethan," Lauren replied. "But they found a loophole. It's out of our hands." Later that day, Ethan sat with Emily in her living room, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. "They're publishing the kids' photos tomorrow," Ethan said quietly. Emily's face paled. "No," she whispered. "I won't let them drag my children into this circus." "I won't either," Ethan said. "There's one way we can stop it, but it's drastic." Emily crossed her arms. "What are you thinking?" "If I give them something bigger, something that shifts the focus completely, they'll drop the story on the kids," Ethan explained. "A controlled interview, something personal enough to satisfy them." Emily frowned. "So, you're going to sell your soul to protect them?" "If that's what it takes," Ethan said firmly. "I'll do it." The interview aired the next evening, and it was rawer than anything Ethan had ever done. He spoke about his failures leaving Emily, abandoning the family he didn't know he had, and the guilt that haunted him every day. "This isn't about redemption for me," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's about doing right by my children. They deserve a father who's present, who fights for them. I'm trying to be that father." The tabloid dropped the story on the children, the shift in narrative pushing their coverage toward Ethan's confession instead. Back at Emily's house, the children were asleep, but Emily sat in the kitchen, watching the interview. When Ethan arrived later, she greeted him with a guarded expression. "You meant what you said?" she asked. "Every word," Ethan replied. Emily studied him for a long moment. "It helped," she admitted. "The press is backing off for now. But this doesn't end here, Ethan. You've opened the door to scrutiny, and it could come back." "I'll deal with it," Ethan promised. "I won't let it touch you or the kids again." Emily hesitated, then sighed. "For their sake, I hope you're right." The next day, Ethan took the children to the park. It was the first time they'd been out in weeks, without security trailing them. Alex and Ben raced ahead, while Charlie and Diana stayed by Ethan's side. As they played, Ethan felt a rare moment of peace. For the first time, he saw a future that wasn't dominated by his mistakes, but by the joy of being part of his children's lives. "Dad," Alex said as they packed up to leave. Ethan turned, his heart skipping at the word. "Yeah, buddy?" Alex hesitated, then smiled. "Thanks for coming today." Ethan knelt down, his throat tight. "I'll always come, Alex. Always." As they walked back to the car, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't perfect, but for the first time, he believed he could be the father they needed. Weeks passed, and the storm that had once engulfed Ethan and his family began to settle. The tabloids moved on to new stories, and the presence of paparazzi outside Emily's house and the children's school slowly faded. The quiet was a relief, but the scars of the ordeal lingered. Ethan continued to show up for soccer practices, school projects, and even Diana's art show at the local community center. He wasn't perfect, but he was there. One evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Ethan sat across from Emily in the living room. The house was quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher in the background. "You've changed," Emily said suddenly, breaking the silence. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. "Have I?" She nodded. "The man who walked out 5 years ago wouldn't have done what you've done these past few weeks. You would have called your lawyers, thrown money at the problem, and moved on. But this is different." Ethan leaned back, a small, sad smile on his face. "I had to lose everything to realize what mattered, and what I lost can never fully be undone." Emily looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You can't change the past, Ethan. But you've made a start. The kids see it. I see it. It's up to you to keep proving it." A month later, Ethan attended a parent-teacher meeting at the children's school. As he walked through the halls, the sound of laughter and the sight of colorful drawings on the walls filled him with a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. At the meeting, Alex's teacher, Mrs. Turner, pulled Ethan aside. "Alex talks about you all the time," she said with a warm smile. "He says you helped him with his wind turbine project and that you promised to take him to a science museum." "I did," Ethan replied. "And I will." Mrs. Turner nodded. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. He looks up to you." The words filled Ethan with a mixture of pride and responsibility. Later that evening, Ethan brought up an idea to Emily as they watched the children play in the backyard. "I've been thinking," he began. "I want to set up something long-term for the kids. Not just trust funds, but something meaningful, a foundation maybe. Something that supports families like ours, the ones caught between chaos and second chances." Emily raised an eyebrow. "A foundation?" "Yeah," Ethan said, his tone thoughtful. "To provide legal and emotional support for single parents, help protect kids from the media, maybe even fund scholarships. I want the kids to be part of it when they're older, something they can carry forward." Emily studied him, her skepticism softening into respect. "That's actually a good idea." Ethan smiled. "I'm trying." "You're doing more than trying," she admitted. Months turned into a year. The foundation, aptly named Second Chances, launched with Emily's involvement and the children's growing curiosity about the world around them. Diana designed its logo, a heart with interlocking hands, while Ben dreamed up a website concept. Ethan's relationship with the children blossomed. Alex invited him to every science fair. Ben asked for his help with coding. Charlie shared his thoughts and feelings openly. And Diana painted pictures of their family. Emily and Ethan found a rhythm not as a reunited couple, but as co-parents united by their love for their children. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Alex raised his glass of milk. "To Dad," he said with a grin. "To Dad," the others echoed, lifting their cups. Ethan's chest tightened as he looked around the table, his heart full. This was his redemption, his second chance. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And for the first time in years, Ethan believed he had finally found his way home. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of redemption, resilience, and second chances. Ethan's story reminds us that while the past cannot be undone, the future is always within our power to shape with love, dedication, and courage. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We've got more incredible stories coming your way, filled with twists, turns, and powerful lessons about life. Stay tuned, and thank you for being part of our community.